Okay, welcome everyone. Our first Droplet workshop. We are going to be discussing adding dynamic assignees. This is going to be a very, hopefully hands-on interactive workshop. That's my hope. So I'm going to be giving you all materials to follow along. If you could start by opening up your Droplet application, we're going to be working inside the builder. I'm going to give stuff for data sets. You can look at our templates page to grab a form that you would like to try this on, or I'll share a file that the template that I am working on, so we can all do this together. First off, my name is Shanna. I am the customer education manager here at Droplet. My whole purpose is to help you understand and work fluently within Droplet, give you the tools to make Droplet everything you wanted for your organization, and also to help you with anything that you might have questions on. I put together this session so that we can work on something that I see is often used in Droplet Forms and give you the power to do it yourself. And hopefully through this session, and then maybe if you need some follow-up open office hours, you'll be able to add dynamic assignees to your forms. It's this really efficient way to assign forms to different people based on an input inside your form. So we'll be going over a general overview of what a workflow is, what data sets are, and then how they interact and how we can use that to power our assignments through these dynamic assignees. So we're going to cover the most used dynamic assignees. It's a very flexible way to assign, and it can be used a number of ways, but we see it most often used when you base it off of a data set of information or when you send a form back to the submitter. So we'll cover those, which should give you everything you need to assign workflow steps dynamically. Okay, let's go over the workflow and data sets. Actually, I'm going to go back one step here because I have a few things to send to you all. First, I'm going to send some documentation into the chat. We are moving away from our previous documentation site onto a new one. You can find all support documents by either clicking this help button here or by going to support.droplet.io. That's also a way that you will be able to submit any support tickets that you need. And then the next one is a specific article that goes over our upcoming trainings for the next month. We'll be doing another workshop. That one is to, it'll be from template to testing. So we'll take a template, get it all ready, start testing so that you can see how easy it is to start implementing Droplet on your own. I am going to also send you all in the chat our template article, so that will give you access to all of the forms that we currently have a template of. And if there is one that you are interested in using, either during this session or at another time, please send us an email, send it to me in the chat. We'll make sure that those get added to your organization. And then the last thing I'm going to add in here is the form that I am working on. This is the employee reimbursement form. So I'm sending that in the chat here. If you download that, we can start by importing it into your organization so that you can use that and follow along with all these steps. Okay. So once you've downloaded that form, what you will want to do is come to your forms page. I did check over everybody that was registered to make sure you all had that form builder access. And I believe everyone is up to date. If you don't have access to this builder right here, please let me know in the chat so I can get that fixed for you. We want to do this working on it together. So once you have that downloaded, you will come to the forms page in Droplet. This button here called import will allow you to import that downloaded file. You'll see that it's a .droplet file. I have a few of these from other work I've been doing, but ours is the employee reimbursement form. Once you open that up, it'll prompt you to either edit the name or just create the form here. So you can edit this information if you want to, edit the description, maybe say that it's for testing so that people aren't confused and start using it, or whatever you want to do in this description. We're going to leave these empty for now. And then click create the form. I have already created that form in here. So I'm just going to open it up. So once you create that form, it'll just open up the builder for you. And we should see something like this. I did adjust this reason here, and I might adjust that to the template in general, but not to be concerned right now. So if you're opening up the form, this is what you should be seeing. Is everyone good to go so far? Feel free to unmute or type in the chat if you want me to slow down. Good, we got a thumbs up. All right, before we get into the dynamic assignees, I want to review the structure of the workflow just in general, and then see what we have going on in this employee reimbursement form. We'll go over the requirements for assignee, also talk about data set structure and how to connect that to the form. All right, jumping in here, we have our layout right when we get into the builder. What we want to do is navigate over to this workflow. Here we can see a fairly simple workflow, but we do have a few things going for us. Since it's a template, we have some interesting just placeholder emails, and we're going to need to change those. What I might want to do first is changing those in the payroll step, because that will be a static assignment in my head. But let's talk about what this workflow is once we look at it. Each of these boxes is a step in the workflow. This one right here, we can see has no connections to the workflow itself, but it is a step in case we wanted to allow for rejecting and stopping a form. When we click on the form or on the step here, we can open it up to see additional details, but we kind of have everything that we need right here. We have the name of the step. We have the status. This will always be the same for a start step here. But if we click over to the approver step, we can see the name, we can see the status, we can change the status if we need to. This is hardly ever used because most of the time when you are including steps, it's just a part of the workflow and it'll always be the in progress status. If you have a rejection workflow that involves an initial rejection and further approval of rejection, that might be a way to label those with that status. Then we have the assignee here. The assignee can be changed just by clicking in that assignee area here. You can see that it is pulling up the accounts in my organization. I also have the ability to select somebody else. So if I do that, I can put in a name and email here. Or unassigned, if nobody needs to be assigned to this, or you are doing a very manual process of not assigning a step and then later manually assigning it from the submissions page, that is an option for you. We will be working with this dynamic. When you click in dynamic, you can see that it opens up a logic panel. And this is where we will enter in our logic to be able to assign it to someone dynamically. So this has already been assigned dynamically. You'll see that it gives an object. We'll talk about that in a minute, what the requirements are for an assignment. And then in between these, you will see transition pathways. So we have two different types of submission or transition pathways. One is from the submit button. When you are working in a form, by default, you will have a submit button, which is the only option for the start step, and then a reject button. And usually this says reject, but it looks like in this template, we changed the text to say send back. So a submit button and a reject button are the ways to take action on that form. And those are dictated by the pathway that we set up in the workflow. So transition pathways from start will show here, from reject will show from the bottom button here. And you can see that I have a reject option to send it back to the start on two different steps here. Otherwise, the transitions are pretty simple, just moving from one step to the other, not considering other pathway options. Okay. Within the assignment, let's come back in here. The requirements to be able to assign a submission, whether it's through dynamic or by selection, would be a name and an email. When you select a static assignment just from one of your accounts or by selecting someone else here, it will automatically format that into the way that the form accepts it, which is an object, which you can see here. The object indicated by these curly braces, and inside the curly braces of the object are key value pairs separated by a comma here. So the key being name, key being email, and then the value would be who it is on those, what name it is and what email it is, just a specific value. That is the requirement. If you've never worked with objects before, I'm going to talk about that a little bit. I think we want to get a little bit down into the details here, so you have a really good understanding of what this entails. Is everyone good so far? Anyone want me to slow down? Any questions? I want this to be a back and forth. If you have questions, please speak up, put your question in the chat. Thank you, Rachel. Thank you, Rebecca. I will keep going then. Okay, I'm gonna head back to my slides here. And I'm gonna use an example for understanding object data type. So we can understand that a car is an object. A car as an object has different properties associated with it. So these are both cars, but they're not the same because they have different properties. So some of the first car's properties would be the color is different. Its color is mint green. Whoops. The make is Fiat. The model is 500 probably. I did a Google image search, so I don't know cars super well, but that's what I'm guessing. In the second car, we have its color property is white. Its color its make property is Subaru, model is Outback. So these are all different properties. And we can, looking at this, the color in this case would be the key when we're thinking of key value pairs. And it might translate into a droplet data set looking something like this. Inside your curly braces, that indicates that it's an object. We have a key value pair using a colon. And I'm trying to highlight, and it's not the path in presentations. So the color is a key. The value here is mint green. We have a comma separating those two properties or three properties out. Then we have a different key here of make, the value of fiat, model, the value of 500, and same thing, same formatting for the Subaru. So that's what you can do and see in data sets is creating these containers. I like to consider them folders and subfolders here. If you are a very organized person, you probably have folders inside your computer, and accessing those folders, you need to know the name, in that case, the key. And once you access it with the key, the name, you can open up and see the contents of that folder. That's kind of what we do inside of forms as well. When we're accessing information from the data set, we need to know the name, the key, to be able to access that object, that folder, and get the data that's inside of it. So moving on to an example that would make more sense for us in Droplet, things that we see more often. We often see this structure of locations, and then inside those locations, we might have a supervisor, a secretary, other people involved in workflows, other people involved in different forms. You can have a data set that is kind of all encompassing and is used across several different forms. So the structure might not make sense for one specific form, but it makes sense for other forms, and make it kind of a very robust data set. Or you can do really simple data sets that just work with one form, and are easy to access. So that would be the different levels with folders, subfolders, etc. What we often see is this structure here, and it's used most often in workflows where you have locations, and then those locations have supervisors that will be involved in approving different forms, or secretaries that will be involved in that. And so you have a level of highlight that does not work. You have the main folder of the location, so maybe a school. Inside of that school, you have your supervisor, which will contain the object that's important for assignments, which we remember as being the name and email. So if we were to use what's in front of us here, just the supervisor, it would look something like we have at the bottom here. The location being the label of the folder, label of the object. And then we have a subfolder that we label as supervisor, which gives us another object that contains the name and email here. As you are building these out, you either use the code editor or the visual editor of the data sets. It'll build something that looks like this, just this different levels. So I created a data set before this session, and I will access it, and I'll give you kind of this structure already set, and I'll put it into the chat. So here is my data set. If I go into the builder, I can see this one's structured really simply, or I have one that's structured like we had before with different levels. If I look at that in the visual editor, I can see the labels of these objects, label of another object, and inside of that are the contents of that object, the name and email. So I am going to copy this and put it in the chat. It's too long. Okay, that's fine. Let's just do 5 locations. And see how that does. Too long. Part 1. Ah. Part 2. And the way that you would create a data set is similar to how you would create a form. Plus button here, ask for name and description. You click create. It will open up that code editor where you can just paste in what I've added into the chat. And that will give you this beautiful data set here. Okay, any questions on objects, on how this is structured? Is it making sense? Okay, I'm taking silence as a good sign here. All right. So we have our data set structure. Added it into Droplet. So we have a new data set here. I am going to go ahead and publish this. You don't have to publish it to connect a data set, but for testing out the data, it will need to be published. And I want to make sure that we're setting up the right formulas and it's getting the right information here. Okay. So that's published. I'm going to go back here. We've created our data set. Now we want to connect that data set to our form. So within our form, we don't have a data set tab up here, but if we switch to the code editor, we can see a data set tab here. Inside the employee reimbursement template is already set up this approver routing object, which we can see with the label approver routing, right? I'm just going to delete that for ease here. And I'm going to throw another link here into the chat. This is our support documentation that walks you through how to connect a data set to a Droplet form. So there are 2 different data set types. One is local, that would just exist inside the form, and then global, which is the one that exists outside of the form, but still in Droplet, that can be used across multiple forms. So since we've already done that outside of the form itself, I can come to this article, grab the object that makes sense for me here, and I'll explain the difference. So these are both the same structure, same format, except that you give a version number here in this top one. And this would make sense in several cases where you have a lot of submissions coming into your form and you don't want changes to the data set to impact the already submitted forms, the ones that are in progress. So often we have like pay schedules inside a data set that we don't want associated with forms until we don't want the updates associated with previous forms. So we'll just create a version that has the current pay schedules, and then maybe it's version 1. And then all of the submissions for this version of the form that has version 1 will only accept version 1 when you update the data set later with the new pay schedule. It won't impact anything that's already been created. And then you update that inside your form as well. This one down here is more often used where any changes to data sets, just update your form, which is what we will use in this case. So I highlight and copy, come back to my employee reimbursement form, and I'm going to paste that here. Where it says name of global data set, we can use the same name that we created here, location test, or we can give it a new ID here. So here, I'll just call it approver routing. And then we want the dataset ID. You can find the dataset ID by hovering over the name of the dataset. Nope. That's not working. Never mind. That's how you find the ID for a form. So you can find the dataset ID here, just that random grouping of numbers inside the URL. Copy that. Come back to your form and replace that value. So here we're saying I give this data set the name of approver routing that I'm using in the form. So whenever I want to access that data set, I'm going to use this ID. And it's saying that this is actually using that data set, which you're giving it the ID here. Save that. Now I can come back to my visual editor. Now that the data set is added, what we want to do is get a list of those locations that we've added into the data set. Location 1, 2, 3, etc. into the form. And you can see I already have a drop down ready for my locations in this reimbursement form. And it's already got some logic set up. So this is where we want to pull in the data set and say we want all of those listed locations. In the case that you need to add a location, you can add it to your data set and it will reflect inside of this dropdown. It'll pull that location in there. So this options logic here gives you the formula you need already. So it was called approver routing. It's already called approver routing, which is great. But I'll tell you kind of what this means. You have different functions you can use with an object, different ways that you can grab information. So this object.keys is saying, I want the key for all of those objects in here. Remember what this is the key. This is the label for the folder of the object that contains the information for that location. And then inside the parentheses, you give it the dataset ID, what we've labeled it as in this form. And then this dot sort just sorts it alphabetically. Since this is by numbers, it should sort by 1, 2, 3, etc. Done. That's already added, which is great. Then we want to add a computed field, which happens to already be on this employee reimbursement form. So this is a computed component. It gives you the ability to add in logic here. This logic is a bit more complicated than I was going to do in this session, but it already exists here. and I'm just going to delete it. What this is saying is, if the person submitting this is the approver that's identified in that data set, we're going to give it a different person. And that's the way the data set was set up for this specific form, is it had two options for approvers that were labeled routing 1 and routing 2. And so it just, based on whether the submitter was approver 1, it would send to approver 2 in that case. But that's not how our data set is set up. So I'm going to delete this. And I'm going to put something in the chat here. First, I'm going to put in that formula that we did before. It already existed in this form, but for future reference, that object.keys inside the parentheses, dataset, the ID of the dataset, which you can replace from that structure I gave you. Okay. Now I'm going to add a formula that I will use, and that's the structure. So we have dataset ID, which the dataset ID, what we called it inside this form was approver routing. Then we want the component ID, and that's something that I didn't check when I was doing this. So I'm going to cancel that. The location is going to, somebody's going to select a location. So we need to know what they selected. And we do that by finding what the value is for this specific component. And we're always, whenever we work in formulas, whenever we want to understand, whenever we want to know something from another component, we use the ID. So I'm going to copy that ID. Never mind. It's called location. That's easy enough to remember. Go back to my computed so I can do the formula. Bring in that formula here. Give it the dataset labeled, dataset key here, approver routing. And then the component ID. So what we want to be looking for is the location. Whatever they selected, we want to plug into that data set to find that location. And then we do a dot here. That dot kind of indicates we want to go down a level inside the object. So it's an object in an object. And that dot tells us we want to go down to the supervisor object. Just give me the contents of that. I could throw in another dot here to get the email, just the value of the email. But we want that object that contains the name and email, which is everything inside that supervisor level. So that's how that works. I'm going to save it. And I want to test it to make sure it's working and giving me the right information. So 2 ways to do that. Nope, just one way to do that. I'm going to open up the debug view. Click this 3 dots, select debug here. This is going to give me the look of the form on each step, and then I can see what values are being added to the form. This is helpful when you have things running in the background like that formula here that's not displaying. Then I can see what it's actually giving me. So if I select, boom, yes, we have all of the locations that we had inside that data set. If I select location 1, I'm going to look down here for that computed component that we had called approver route. And it is giving me the object containing the name and email of the right person, I assume, which is location 1, supervisor Aubrey. It's working. And if I change that location, the approver should change as well. Perfect. So that when somebody submits this, it's going to the right person. The last thing we need to do then is within our workflow, we need to assign it to the name and email. We want to select dynamic here. We're going to erase this, and we're just going to give it that ID. You can find that inside the builder as well. If I switched over to the form and found that computed and then went down to find the ID. But it also exists here. That's the ID for that computed component, because that's giving us the right information. I put that in here, done. Now it will assign to whatever populates inside of this computed component. And then I'll just change this to our payroll person. Pretty simply select the assignee, find my payroll person, click them. And that is how you do a dynamic assignee based on a data set. Okay. Last thing we want to do is the submit. I clicked, I tried to highlight. Okay. The dynamic assignee of the submitter. So why is the submitter a dynamic assignee? It is because we don't know who the submitter is until they type in their name and email. And the values of those two components create the submitter. And if we didn't have the name and email, we wouldn't really know who submitted the form. So it's always dynamic. We're never going to have the same submitter. Use cases for using the submitter as a dynamic assignee would be sending the form, in this case, sending the form back to the submitter in the case of revisions being needed. I've seen it used in employee contract forms where maybe your HR person fills out the pay, the dates, the start date, whatever, that populates a letter contract for them, and then it goes to, that would be a different situation. If the submitter is involved later in the process, you might want to create a step and assign it to the submitter. Those are the main use cases. So in this specific case, we want to send it back to the start step, which will need to have an assignment set here. Otherwise, it'll just be unassigned when it goes back to start step. We're going to do the same thing, open up that dynamic, and we are going to use a helper function. So our engineering team created a bunch of helper functions to kind of to get the name and email a little bit easier, instead of like creating that object yourself with name and then the component ID being submitted by name, setting it up that way. They created a helper function which just gets all of that information for you. And I'll put it into the chat here as well. It is called get submitted by. Oops. With an opening and closing parentheses here. That function will get the name and email inside of an object for the submitter. Once that is added, you click done. And if it ever routes back to the submitter, it will grab that name and email that were input into the form and assign it to that person. Save my changes, and this is pretty much good to go. If I wanted to add any notifications, change up anything else within the form, I could do that here. This is just a template, so you might want to adjust other things, but that is a dynamic assignee for you. I did schedule out a full hour. I wasn't sure how long our workshop would take. Any questions on anything we went through, any data sets that you have in your organization that you want to kind of understand how to structure out a formula for, the time is yours to just pick my brain on that. Awesome. I hope that means that you understood everything and you're ready and practiced already as we were going along, so that you can do this inside of your own forms. If you start trying to implement this and end up having questions later on, yes, I will send the video. Feel free to review this video or come to open office hours and get one-on-one help with me or some of the other implementation team to walk you through building that out yourselves. Thank you everybody for coming. This was super fun. I hope you guys had a good time and learned something here.